Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Community Development Block Grant Application webinar. I'm Melissa Latham. I'm the Director of Communications and Policy at CDFA. We anticipate that today's presentation, including time for questions, will run from now until about 3:30 p.m. So appreciate you putting your questions in the Q&A box throughout the presentation, and we will certainly be pausing to address those during today's presentation. So just a quick overview of our agenda for today. If you could take a moment to drop in the chat box your name and the organization that you're affiliated with, we'd appreciate that. We're going to give you a quick overview of CDFA if you're not familiar, and then really dive into the details on the Community Development Block Grant Program, including eligible activities, thresholds, evaluation and scoring criteria, and again, have some time at the end as well for some questions. So if you could kindly use that Q&A box specifically for your questions, that helps us manage anything coming through and making sure that we see all of your questions and are able to address them throughout the presentation. We'll also be sharing the slides as well as a link to the recording and related materials following today's webinar. So stay tuned for that in your inbox in the coming days. As I mentioned, just going to give you a quick overview of CDFA. We are a statewide public authority, and we are focused on deploying federal, state, and private resources that maximize the value and impact of community development, economic development, and clean energy initiatives throughout New Hampshire. We have a variety of resources, as I mentioned, that includes grants, loans, and tax credit equity. And we offer technical assistance throughout the pre-application, application, as well as implementation phases of your project. So we're here to support you from concept initiation to planning and development, as well as implementation. And to that end, we do have a number of resources. Of course, today we're here to talk specifically about the Community Development Block Grant Program, how to apply for those federal resources. But as you can see, we do have a number of financial resources in the concept initiation, planning and development, as well as implementation phases. And if you're interested in learning more about those programs in other areas of our work, we're actually hosting another webinar next week and would encourage you to attend, where we'll be providing an overview of all the variety of financial and technical resources that CDFA has to support you in pursuing and implementing your community development goals locally. And so with that, I'm going to quickly hand that over to Molly Kaler, our Director of Housing and Community Development, to dive into the specifics of CDBG.
Thanks, Melissa. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. As Melissa said, I'm now going to dive into some of the details regarding the CDBG program, which you guys are all here today to learn about. Before we jump into the program overview, I just want to take a moment to mention our website. You can see this is a screenshot of the homepage of our website here on this slide. Our website provides streamlined high-level information on our organization, our programs, and also explains ways that nonprofits, municipalities, and businesses can engage with us at CDFA. But we also have a separate resource hub that provides access to program-related information and resources for our partners like you guys. So you can see that can be accessed through clicking on the golden link at the top right-hand corner of the main website where it says resource website, and it will take you to that second website that has much more detail about each of our funding opportunities. And of course, there is a robust section of CDBG related materials on there. So we encourage you to definitely, if you haven't already done so, go to that portion of our website and take a look at all the materials and resources that we have there. So CDBG was established under the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 to address a wide range of housing and community development needs. The primary statutory objectives of CDBG is to develop viable communities. These viable communities are achieved by providing decent housing, a suitable living environment, and expanded economic opportunities, principally for persons of low and moderate income. Through an annual formula allocation process, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, as you'll hear us refer to them as, provides CDBG funds to both entitlement communities and to states. CDFA has administered the annual allocation of CDBG funds on behalf of the state of New Hampshire since 2003. We coordinate the investment of more than $150 million into New Hampshire communities through this program. These critical resources have been deployed across the state and have made a significant impact on economic development, housing, and community-based projects in dozens of municipalities. CDFA deploys approximately $9.4 million of Community Development Block Grant or CDBG funds each year. CDBG is a bit different than many of the other grant programs that are out there when it comes to who is actually eligible to submit an application. That's because applicants must be a unit of local government. So that is either a municipality or county. Funding is often then subgranted to a subrecipient organization who carries out the project. However, the grantee can also carry out the projects directly if that makes sense. All New Hampshire counties and municipalities are eligible to apply for CDBG funds, with the exception of 5 cities that are deemed to be HUD entitlement communities. These communities, the 5 communities you can see listed on the screen, receive a separate, their own allocation of CDBG funds each year. And therefore, projects that are located in those communities must apply for CDBG funding directly through the municipality and not through CDFA. This slide shows the breakdown of CDBG funding, both on a national scale and here in New Hampshire. You can see, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the overall allocation from HUD is goes to state level programs like New Hampshire, but a vast majority, 70% of it goes to entitlement programs that are often at the municipal level. As we discussed again in the last slide, entitlement communities receive those funds directly from HUD. And again, just wanted to point out that a majority of funds do go out that way, but in New Hampshire, it's kind of the opposite. A majority of our CDBG funds are in our statewide program and admitted by CDFA. So you can see the 75% on that right-hand pie, and only 23% of the funding that comes into the state goes to those 5 entitlement communities that were on the last slide to be administered to projects located there. We have another pie chart here for you just to show you how we break out our annual allocation of a little over $9 million each year. You can see the majority of the funding gets broken up into 3 different programs: our housing, public facilities, and economic development programs. And the remaining funds are broken out into funding for emergency activities that fall within those 3 overarching programs, and planning activities that also fall under those buckets. And then the remaining few percentages is for technical assistance and administrative work to administer those funds. This graphic illustrates the flow of CDBG funding. So you can see it starts with HUD at the federal level, and the funding is then allocated by HUD to CDFA. Then CDFA awards funding to a municipality or county, which is represented in this graphic by that town hall or church looking slide, but it's supposed to be a town hall. And then those municipalities are often working with a organization that's carrying out the project, who we call a subrecipient, which is represented by that second to last slide of the 3 individuals meeting there. And then ultimately the project is benefiting low to moderate income individuals who we refer to as beneficiaries. And then that graphic, it's those folks that are holding hands. So I want to pause here and see if there's any questions about that really high level information, just about the funding and allocations, before we move forward into some more details.
I'm Molly, not seeing any questions at this time, but definitely encourage folks as those questions do come up to drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to answer them.
All right, thanks. All right, so we'll dive in here to talking a little bit about funding opportunities and community limits. So as you saw from the previous slide, CDFA administers several different CDBG programs throughout the year. Today, we're going to be mainly focusing on housing and public facilities programs, as we have a new round that is going to be coming up, but that we'll be talking about a little later. So we're offering this webinar today to talk specifically about those programs, but we will also touch upon the other CDBG programs as well. I want to note that we do have Molly Donovan, who's recently joined our team, who is overseeing the CDBG Economic Development Program. And both she and I are happy to communicate at any point with folks who have project ideas and want to learn more about the programs. The funding limits per community per year are listed on this slide. Any community is eligible for up to these amounts. It could be two $250,000 projects, for example, or one $500,000 project. So it can be broken up a variety of ways. But most of the maximum funding amount that a single project is eligible for is $500,000 or $750,000 for a couple for a specific type of housing project. But so sometimes it might a community's allocation or a municipality's allocation might be taken up by just one single project, or if it's a project that doesn't need the whole maximum award amount, it might be a couple different projects that a community would be eligible to come in for in one CDBG program year. This next slide talks about those deadlines that I just referred to. We do have a housing and public facilities round that is coming up, and we'll be accepting applications for round 2 of the CDBG program year this coming January 29th. The CDBG program year runs July 1st to June 30th. So we're currently in program year 23. And so our July round was technically the first round of the CDBG program year. And now this round that's coming up is our second round, which can be a bit confusing because it doesn't align with the calendar year. We do have that upcoming round 2 for housing and public facilities applications, but all other CDBG programs, the planning grants, emergency grants, and economic development grants can be accepted on a rolling basis anywhere during the program year, which again is July 1 to June 30th. So we do encourage folks that have any of those other types of grant applications that they're wishing to submit to reach out to us ahead of time and talk to us before you submit it. But of course, you're welcome to do that at any point during the year. You don't have to wait for a structured round. So when you're planning to apply for CDBG funds, it's important to think through the project from the grant writing stage, in the application phase, all the way through project implementation and completion. The grant writer and the grant administrator you choose will play an important role from the beginning to the end of the project, guiding your organization through the application process and then successfully administering the CDBG funds and completing your project. CDBG grant writers and grant administrators must be procured by the municipality or county and can be funded with funds from your CDBG grant. Subrecipients may write, but they cannot administer their own grants. We strongly recommend working with a trained CDBG grant writer, and we require you to work with a trained CDBG grant administrator to help administer your CDBG award funding that's awarded to you. The next slide is a bit busy, and so I just want to highlight here that what we attempted to do this graphic is to kind of give an overview of the process of applying and then being awarded funding. It starts with a pre-application meeting or a discussion with us at CDFA about your project idea, so we can learn more about it and to make sure that it would meet eligibility criteria before you get too far along in the process. And then you can see the process goes all the way through submitting the application, the review process, then once staff reviews applications, they need to projects are recommended for funding to our Community Development Advisory Committee, or CDAC, and then our board for final approval. And then after that, all CDBG awards, all the contracts that are drafted do have to ultimately get approved by the governor and council at a governor and council meeting. So there are several steps that occur through the grant application process. And then it ultimately leads to the funds being made available. So this is a several month long process, and we'll discuss some of the steps in more detail later in the presentation. All right. Now I'm gonna dive a little bit into more detail about program eligibility, because as I said, we want to make sure before any project gets too far into the applying for funding, that we ensure that the program, that the project and the applicants are eligible. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what those eligibility criteria are. First, on the first slide, we outline the 3 national objectives, the CDBG national objectives that are allowed under the federal regulations. You can see the first one is LMI, which entails providing direct benefits to low and moderate income persons or a household. The second objective is to aid in the prevention or elimination of slums or blight. And then the third objective is the elimination of a serious and immediate threat to public health and safety, which is referred to as urgent need. Here in New Hampshire, all projects, no matter what the national objective, must have a direct benefit to LMI individuals. Therefore, at least 51% of the beneficiaries from any project in New Hampshire that's applying for CDBG funds must be low to moderate income individuals. On this graphic, it's illustrated in the green circle area. And so while this picture shows all of the eligible CDBG objectives that can be funded, in New Hampshire, again, we focus on the LMI, or low to moderate individual national objective. There are 4 different ways that we do talk about in the slide 2 that we're gonna dive into now, where you can meet that objective, and their area benefit, limited clientele, housing, and economic development. So you'll see here this slide starts with the first of those, the area benefit. In order for a grant application to be considered under the area benefit category, the following conditions apply. The benefit must be available to all residents of the project area. The benefit area must be primarily residential in character. At least 51% of the beneficiaries in the project area must be low to moderate income. And the applicant must conduct an income survey or use census data, as long as it coincides with the project area, to establish the percentage of LMI beneficiaries. And this survey must be statistically valid, so you must also provide the survey methodology that's used. We have a lot more detail regarding this on our website and in our application and program guide. But again, that's one way to demonstrate that your project meets the LMI criteria, is through area benefit. The next category you can apply for under LMI is the limited clientele. Under limited clientele, the activity must benefit a specific group of at least 51% LMI individuals. And this is determined by qualifying under one of the following tests or groups. The HUD presumed group, and you can see in the box on the right what HUD defines as a presumed group is outlined there. So if your project benefits that one of those groups of individuals, they would meet the LMC, or the limited clientele national objective. Or you could, if your organization documents family size and income in some other way, that would be another way to demonstrate if there were documentation that shows family size and income. Or if the program that is offering services has income eligibility requirements that limit the services that are provided to LMI individuals, if we can document that, that might be one way to meet the criteria. Or if it's of such nature and location that it would automatically be serving that LMI population, then that would be the last way that you can determine that.
Hi, Molly. Just wanted to make a quick confirmation because we did have a question
Sure.
to confirm that seniors are a part of the target populations that we're looking to serve, and they're listed here in the presumed groups. I didn't know if there was a specific definition or if they should look into the application and program guide for some more information on what seniors might be defined as.
Yeah, that's a great question. But yeah, we do have a bit more information in our application and program guide, or we welcome having a conversation with you to learn a bit more about the population that your organization serves. But yes, elderly persons do fall under the HUD presumed groups. So if that's the primary beneficiary of your project, then it would likely be eligible for CDBG.
Great. And also noting, I know we have a couple questions about eligibility criteria that we'll get to in a couple of slides, and then follow up with some of those questions then.
Yes, definitely. And I apologize. I'm not sure if you guys can hear in the background, but there is somebody outside mowing a lawn. So if there's a little bit of background noise, I apologize. I'm trying to speak a little louder and lean a little closer, but if you hear a persistent noise, it's somebody mowing the lawn outside. The next category that I wanted to talk about is housing. In order to be eligible for CDBG, the housing must serve predominantly low and moderate income occupants. Multifamily housing units must, it requires that the rents also be affordable. And again, the majority of the units need to be occupied by low to moderate income individuals. So if it's a duplex, at least one of the units must be LMI. But other than that, if it's multifamily and more than that, it needs to be more than 51% LMI. Single family housing is not typically funded in New Hampshire at this time, but single family rehab at the national level does require the lone occupant in a single family home to be LMI. But here in New Hampshire, we typically fund multifamily housing. I do want to note that construction of new housing is not typically eligible under CDBG. This is because there are other HUD-funded programs that are in New Hampshire administered by our sister agency, the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, that are designed to predominantly support new housing. So CDBG funds cannot be used to support new housing unless the organization that's carrying out that project is a community-based development organization, or a CBDO. And that's a designation that HUD outlines that needs to be met. So I would be happy to talk to any organization that is looking to do new housing, and we could look to see if the organization might meet the CBDO requirements. But that typically is the only way that new housing can be supported with CDBG funds. Another way that I've seen it support new housing is if there's municipally owned infrastructure such as water or sewer that would be needs to be upgraded in support of the new housing. Say water or sewer line needs to be extended on the public roadway to get to that new housing. That's another way that sometimes CDBG can be used to support new housing. And the next slide just outlines the last way that a project could meet the CDBG national objective, and it's by job creation or retention, and this is for the economic development program only. And activities must either create permanent jobs or on a full-time equivalent basis, or they must retain at least 60% low and moderate income jobs to be eligible. And so again, this is based on the creation of a brand new position, not the filling of a vacant position, but the creation of a brand new position or the retention of a filled position that is at least 61% LMI individuals holding those jobs. Again, that's not, it doesn't pertain to the housing or public facilities programs that we're talking about today, but that is one way if you're looking at economic development funding that the national objective can be met. And again, for all of those 4 categories under the national objectives, we have much more information in our CDBG app and program guide, application and program guide, which is found on our website. And so I encourage you to go check that out if you have questions. And then if you still have further questions, certainly reach out and we'd be happy to talk you through that important eligibility criteria. So the next section, the next item that we're going to talk about is eligible activities. So again, there's kind of 2 layers to determining eligibility if your project might be eligible for CDBG funds. One is what we just talked about to make sure the project meets a national objective. And then 2, the next thing that we need to verify is that the activities that you're going to be carrying out and that you're seeking the funding for are HUD or CDBG eligible activities. Again, those pre-application meetings that I've mentioned a couple times is a critical time and a really useful time for us to make sure that we are find out about the project and be able to determine if the national objective and eligible activities are eligible. So the CDBG planning grant program funds planning and related activities that can help determine whether or not a proposed project is viable. Some examples of activities that can be carried out under planning grants include income surveys, preliminary architectural and engineering designs, cost estimates, energy audits, etc. So planning activities may be eligible for CDBG under the planning grant funding opportunity. And we'd certainly encourage you to check that out if you do intend or do hope to come in for CDBG funding later on in the project timeline once you're able to implement the project. We also do have a new funding opportunity that's in the pilot phase for this program year called Transformational Planning Grants. And that program is focused on advancing community level strategies and planning work that's being done right now related to housing. But our planning grants, our regular $25,000 planning grants, those are eligible for public facilities projects, for housing projects, or economic development projects. It's not related to one specific purpose. The next type of activities that we can fund are housing related activities. The eligible activities include housing and rehabilitation, elderly and ADA access, and like I previously talked about, new construction, but only if it's being completed by a community-based development organization or CBDO. There are a number of conditions that also go along with not only does the housing have to house individuals that are low to moderate income, but there has to be long-term affordability. At CDFA, we require that the project commits to at least 10 years of affordability. And then there are other conditions include rent restrictions, housing quality standards, and per unit costs. So again, we are able to fund certain housing activities that are related to housing. The next category of eligible activities is public facilities. Public facilities falls into 3 different categories broadly: water and sewer, public facilities where public services are provided, and then public property. And so water and sewer is pretty self-explanatory. It can include things like extending or replacing water or sewer lines, constructing water or sewer treatment facilities, etc. Public facilities is a little more broad, but public facilities are eligible activity under public facilities are the construction or rehabilitation of facilities where community services are provided. So we cannot fund under public facilities any operating expenses, but again, it's for the construction or rehabilitation of buildings that are open to the general public that provide some sort of community service. This includes things like housing, it includes things like homeless shelters, community centers and neighborhood facilities. So there's a variety of different types of organizations that provide some type of community service that benefits the general, benefits the community in some way that might be eligible under that category. And then the last one is public property. And that includes things like sidewalks or recreation areas or medical centers, and those projects may also be eligible. Another type of public facilities that I should have mentioned that it's a priority areas of us is childcare and senior services, senior centers as well.
Molly, if we could just pause for a couple of questions on public facilities.
Definitely.
So, someone's curious as to whether funding for a new fire station construction would fall under public facility grant or emergency grants.
That's a great question. So what HUD under HUD's eligible list of activities, fire stations are an eligible activity. However, in New Hampshire, we do not prioritize the funding of fire stations. So while it is an eligible activity and you could certainly apply, that you would apply under public facilities, but that is not a category that we typically fund projects in, and it may be difficult to competitively score because a lot of our rounds we have more applications than we have available funding, and if the project does not fall into one of our priority areas, it just may have a lesser likelihood of being funded, but it would fall under public facilities. The emergency grant program actually is it's just for projects that are otherwise eligible for housing, public facilities, or economic development, but a situation occurs unexpectedly that needs to be addressed quickly, and therefore the project can't wait till one of our regular rounds to come in and apply for funding. So the title of it's a little confusing. It's not for like emergency services, it's just for urgent or projects that come up that need to occur as soon as possible.
Great. And then there's another question about clarifying some of the eligibility criteria for municipalities to receive funding for public facilities. And I know you just went through some potential projects there, but I'm wondering if it might be a good time to address municipal buildings or
that's a good question, because we often get that question under this category here of public facilities. So while we can fund facilities that offer public services, like I said, such as homeless shelters or food banks or childcare centers, CDBG funds cannot be used for buildings where the general conduct of government occurs. So it cannot be used for buildings like that are used as town halls or where the human services or welfare department works out of. If there's general conduct of government occurring, even though by broad definition, by the general definition, that is a public facility, by HUD's CDBG definition, that is not an eligible public facility. And so if a municipality though has a public facility that either they own or that a nonprofit in their community operates out of, they can may be eligible for funding, but you have to look back on those 4 different categories that I just talked about, whether the community as a whole using census data is more than 51% low to moderate income individuals. That's somewhat rare in New Hampshire. While there are certainly pockets where there are high concentrations of LMI individuals, there aren't a whole lot of communities that are more than 51% LMI. How it's typically done for public facilities is, again, looking at the clientele or the individuals who use the services provided in that public facility and looking at their demographic, their income level, and seeing if it meets the LMI category.
Perfect. And I'm going to drop our schedule meeting link into the chat just so folks, if you have a specific project in mind and you'd want to kind of have that conversation with staff about whether it might be eligible and talk through that a little bit more. We know there's some nuances to some of these questions. So you can schedule a meeting with CDFA staff. So I'll include that link in the chat. And while I'm doing that, there's another question about does applying or receiving other CDBG grants exclude us from applying? And I know you talked about in individual programs, there's those.
That's a great question.
And there's also the municipal $1.5 million of accessibility, right?
Yeah. So we do have limits on an annual basis of how much funding a municipality can apply for in any given program. And again, we have the housing program, the public facilities, or the economic development programs. But we do not have a limit on if an organization or a municipality comes back and applies for funding over the course of different years. However, what we do require is that if you already have funding, if you being a municipality or if you being the subrecipient, a nonprofit, already have CDBG funding, we would need to see that open award, that project that you already have funded is moving along and nearing completion. So you could have more than one CDBG application or award, but we would want to see that that they are, one is winding down before you're applying for another one. If they've finished and you've applied for other and received CDBG funding in the past and that project is completed, you could certainly come in and apply again for CDBG. We don't have that kind of like lifetime limits or anything like that. If your organization or your municipality has needs that meet the eligibility criteria for CDBG, we do encourage you to come and talk to us and apply.
Great. We have another eligible activity question. Under public property, is there criteria under which assistance can be provided to an open road or to open a road?
There is some criteria around that, and we could certainly talk to you about that. Streetscapes and roadways are eligible potentially under CDBG. It would have to be in a community that's predominantly low to moderate income individuals, because something like a roadway, you can't necessarily, you don't have a limited number of people that you could survey that are using the roadway. So we'd have to look at the eligibility. We'd have to look at the community that it's located in and see if there might be a way. We honestly don't fund things like that very often, and those are not a high priority. Again, I would say you can see in our application and program guide, we list out our priority projects, and we list it both in the app and program guide and in the scoring matrix that we use to score projects for the housing and public facilities round. And you'll see what projects are priority projects, and street would not be a priority project, but I would certainly be happy to talk to you more about that.
Great. Thanks so much to everybody for the questions. Keep them coming. And I don't see any additional at this time, Molly.
Okay, great. So I'll just move on to the last type of activity that we can fund under CDBG. And again, we're just talking about the 4 types of eligible activities that can be funded. And we've already talked about planning, housing, and public facilities. And now we're talking about economic development. Eligible activities under our economic development program include things like the purchase of equipment, working capital, acquisition, employee training, etc. So again, there are a variety of different types of eligible activities that are categorized as economic development, but all projects must result in job creation and or job retention for at least 60% low and moderate income individuals. So again, there are a variety of activities, but the job creation and job retention are a key eligibility factor that's tied directly to those activities. And then the last slide in this section just talks about some ineligible activities. So we just talked a bit about what are eligible. Again, I already mentioned the general expense of conducting government. So buildings in which government activity is conducted are not eligible in the construction of those buildings, so are not eligible. Political activities, new housing construction, except for those exceptions that I noted, expense of operating and maintaining public facilities. So again, operating costs are not eligible. These housing and public facilities programs in particular, it's really brick and mortar construction and rehabilitation, no operating costs. And then purchase of personal property is not eligible either. All right, I'm going to go through briefly some of the threshold sections, some of the threshold requirements, and then you'll hear somebody else, my colleague Chris Monroe, talk in a little bit for some more of the content. So let's start with municipal thresholds. There are specific federal threshold requirements that must be met at the municipal level, including citizen participation and engagement in advance of an application even being submitted to CDFA. These requirements ensure that the local community is informed about the CDBG program and the specific request for federal funds to support a project within the community. So the municipal thresholds include things like public notice that will be regarding the public hearing you're going to have about the project, the public hearing requirements. Again, the purpose of the public hearing is to inform the public about the CDBG program and your specific application. And there also needs to be a housing and community development plan that's adopted by the governing body in accordance with public notice and public hearing requirements. The plan identifies current housing and community development needs or those anticipated in the next 3 years at the municipal level, and it identifies short and long-term objectives that are consistent with national and state objectives. And then lastly, the residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan, which is a mouthful, but that must be adopted before CDBG funds can be obligated or expended. And public notice and hearing requirements also apply to that relocation assistance plan as well. So those activities must occur before a CDBG application is even submitted. And then we also, in addition to municipal thresholds, have application thresholds. This additional documentation is required throughout the application to enable CDFA to further evaluate an application for readiness and to understand the capacity of the grantee and the subrecipient if there is one. Because we need to make sure that they are set up to successfully carry out the project. So these application thresholds include a complete application that includes a UEI, conformance to federal, state, and program rules and regulations, documentation showing that the project meets other readiness criteria, such as state and local planning board approvals and other necessary permits. Those need to be started and likely to be approved, and there needs to be some evidence of that with the application. There also needs to be information that we can use to complete a grantee capacity assessment, and that evaluates an applicant's capacity and performance to carry out a proposed community development project. For prior grantees, this includes evaluation of the applicant's present capacity to undertake a new program and its prior performance using CDBG funds. So again, that relates back to one of the questions earlier where we are in doing the initial application review, we are making sure that if there were any past CDBG awards that they were successfully completed or are near completion, and that there is the capacity to take on additional CDBG funds. And then also documents that are needed for CDFA to conduct grantee and subrecipient financial reviews. Because again, we want to be able to ensure that the project can be successfully carried out on a financial level by the applicant and the sub-applicant. And then lastly, we also require a compliance plan that demonstrates that the applicant has considered how to undertake all the federal compliance measures. And then CDFA has an energy policy that we're going to be talking about shortly. And we want to make sure that there's evidence that the project will be able to meet the CDFA energy policy. The next slide, I think Chris is going to pop on here just to talk a little bit more. Again, this is Chris Monroe, our Senior Community Development Manager. He's just going to pop on to talk a little bit more about the compliance plan and what that entails.
Thanks, Molly. Yep, Chris Monroe, Senior Community Development Manager here at CDFA, just to talk a little bit about the compliance plan, some of the requirements in there, as well as the energy policy. So the compliance plan, as you can see here on this slide, is a document that must be completed and uploaded with the application. The plan outlines how a grantee plans to address key compliance topics, which include the national objective and eligible activity, which Molly discussed, the environmental review, which is a HUD requirement, financial management systems, procurement, labor standards, which includes Davis-Bacon, Wage Act, acquisition, relocation, if you're going to be using CDBG funds to purchase property, reporting and record keeping, and monitoring and closeout. And again, this kind of highlights the importance of using a qualified grant writer and qualified grant administrator to administer the grant to make sure that the compliance plan is set up properly and followed. If the applicant is awarded CDBG funds, the compliance plans will be reviewed and finalized in a meeting with all project stakeholders. And additional details on each of these topics can be found in our CDBG implementation guide on CDFA's resource hub under Community Development Block Grant. And then you go to the implementation section of that. I apologize for my little black cat, Oliver, who wants to steal the spotlight here. Come on, buddy. Let's go. So next, we'll talk about CDFA energy programs and energy policy. CDFA provides several resources for applicants seeking to improve their facility's energy efficiency or add renewable energy. Grants for energy-related analysis, low-interest financing, and CDFA technical assistance help applicants to build a better project. And next, we'll talk about our energy assessment and TA program grants. The program that we'd like to highlight is our Community Facilities Energy Assessment and Technical Assistance Program grants. Eligible municipalities and nonprofit organizations can apply for grants covering 75% of the cost of community facility study. This is a very easy application with approval typically in less than a week. CDFA aims to ensure that our investments support projects working to reduce future operating costs, improving occupant comfort and health, and improving durability of facilities. CDFA developed our first energy policy in 2020 to make sure applicants to our programs assess these opportunities. The following requirements apply to all CDFA, CDBG, tax credit, and clean energy fund applications, and to any project proposing a physical alteration to existing energy systems like building envelope, mechanical systems, lighting, etc., or for new construction, which includes additions and gut rehabs. Alternative types and levels of assessments recommended by an accredited energy professional or organization will be considered. So they don't have to be specifically energy charrettes or energy assessments, but if you're working with a qualified energy professional, excuse me, they can provide more recommendations to that. In some cases, if your project does not relate to energy systems, we do have a waiver process, but you'll have to work with Scott Maslansky, the director of our clean energy program, on that waiver process. The energy policy is available in the application and program guide and also on our resource website. This table shows the energy policy requirements. The two key requirements highlighted are that the applicant complete a level 2 energy audit and that you consult with the appropriate utility for potential implementation incentives. We want to make sure you don't leave potential funding on the table, as those funds could help improve the project design and future savings. And we also have a set of recommendations as well. Sorry, Melissa, could you go back? Thank you. First is that projects try to incorporate any recommendations above energy code into their final design or equipment purchases. Second, we encourage high performance construction, following guidelines to meet any of the standards. Third is that projects commission any new energy system. Commissioning is where a third party verifies that a system was installed correctly and trains building staff on how to operate. Fourth is that the design team considers transitioning from any fossil fuels to high efficiency electric systems. An example would be moving from an oil boiler to an air source heat pump. And fifth, the project looks into opportunities for solar and other renewable energy systems. And water wastewater projects will also be required to examine whether an energy assessment is appropriate. And here's some contact information for the New Hampshire Saves program with the corresponding utility contacts. The earlier your utility is aware of your project, the better position they are to offer incentives, which in some cases might impact your design or equipment choices. We will provide you with a list of utility contacts as well as energy consultants, and please let them know you are applying for CDFA funds. So here are the next steps. The first is to review the CDFA energy policy with your design team. The second is to contact your utility representatives. The third is applying for energy assessment grants. The fourth is, if needed, to submit a waiver request form. And the fifth is, if you have any questions, please reach out to Scott Maslansky. And next, we have a brief slide about the Inflation Reduction Act opportunities. As you can see, information is still coming out related to this act, but we do our best, especially Scott, to sort of analyze the information that we're provided to see how it could impact projects. And that is Scott's contact information. And you can also contact me as well, and I can answer questions or funnel them to Scott.
Great, thanks, Chris. All right, so now I'm going to be back with you guys to wrap up the presentation and talk just about the evaluation and scoring of the applications for the CDBG program. So if the application is determined to be complete and meets the threshold criteria, it's going to enter the evaluation process against other applications in that round. Again, for housing and public facilities, we accept applications on a round. So we are not only looking at applications on the merits of the project itself, but also in relationship to other projects that are submitted applications in that round. We will look and make sure that the project meets the CDBG national objective and that it is the project involves an eligible CDBG activity. We are going to evaluate if the applicant and sub-applicant have the capacity to carry out the grant project. We're going to make sure that there are enough committed resources to to complete the project. And again, that's committed resources. Before applying for CDBG, you need to have all other funding that's required to complete the project lined up and committed, and be able to demonstrate that in the application. And so if that is not able to be demonstrated, we would likely deem that the application isn't ready to be funded yet. And then we also have to make sure that all specific program area requirements are met. And throughout the review process, we may come back to you. The staff involved in reviewing the applications may come back to applicants and request additional information if needed to be able to determine if these criteria are met. The next slide just talks about our community progress, CDFA's community progress indicators. One way to show the need for your project is to cite specific data or information. In the past, applicants have cited national studies or more general data on the topic or issue that they plan to address with their project. So CDFA has been increasing its capacity to collect and share data that's specific and relevant to New Hampshire communities. And so we've assembled a set of community indicators that help document the needs and issues in a community using reliable, accessible data from a variety of sources. The CDFA community indicators fall into 3 broad categories that you see here. They include basic human needs, access to opportunity, and community sustainability and viability. Community sustainability and vibrancy. With help from the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, we assembled data from a variety of sources, including the U.S. Census Bureau, New Hampshire Employment Security, New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, and many others. And the data are displayed at either the municipal or county level. Each data set deals with a specific topic, such as poverty, population, or access to health care. The community progress indicators also serve as the basis for what we call the core data index that contributes to the CDBG scoring system. So you'll see in the scoring matrix that's included as an appendix in the CDBG application and program guide that we each of the programs looks at where the project is located and what the community what the core data index is for that community. And again, it's the first scoring element within each of the CDBG programs. The next slide shows a sample. It's back from 2002, but it just shows a snapshot of the different 13 indicators that are compiled for each municipality and for the 10 counties. You can download any of this data. We have it all available on our website. You can download Excel spreadsheets and sort that if that information would be helpful to you for other work that you're doing, or maybe for the project that you're undertaking. We do use this data again as part of our scoring criteria, but we do have it publicly available to hopefully be helpful in the work that you're doing if you wanted to drill down and look at some of this other material as well. So now I'm just going to real briefly go through the criteria for the different CDBG programs. We're going to start with the housing program. You'll see that the maximum total score that an application can get is 200 points. We have updated the scoring a little bit over the past few years. We updated it back in 2021 and to try to ensure that we were capturing the right set of criteria to be looking at to elevate the projects of the highest need. And based on review and analysis, we after doing about 4 rounds or 2 years, we made a couple more revisions that started in the July round this year in July round, and there will be no changes between the July round and this round in the housing score. And what you see here is what the current the scoring is for the housing program. So you'll see we're looking at things such as the need and impact, the long-term benefit of the project, how ready the project is to get underway, the amount of leverage or match that a project might have. Some projects come in seeking it for funding to be predominantly from CDBG. Other projects have a variety of other funding resources, and CDBG is a small part of that. So you'll see that we have different criteria to capture each of those things, and the maximum total score is 200 points. The next slide just gives a snapshot of the public facility scoring criteria. Again, that's also out of a maximum total point number of 200. The public facility scoring criteria prioritizes impact, long-term benefits, and priority projects, and also strong community development activities. So as I mentioned before, but it's really important if you wanted to see more detail about these scoring criteria and a definition or explanation about which each of the metric and what we're looking for and how you could get the maximum amount of points, that is outlined in the CDBG application and program guide, which is posted on our website. And we have all the scoring criteria in an appendix that's part of that guide. The next scoring criteria that we wanted to take a quick look at is for the economic development program. Scoring depends upon the type of project for economic development and what kind of entity is implementing the project, whether it be a business, a community, or a nonprofit organization. There's a minimum score for each category. So for business loans, the need to get at least 265 points. There needs to be at least 250 points for grants to nonprofits and public infrastructure projects that support job retention. But in all cases, again, for economic development, the project must result in the retention or creation of jobs, with at least 60% of those jobs for low and moderate income individuals. And then we have our planning grants. The maximum amount of points that you can get for a planning grant is 25 points. So again, it's a smaller point range that we have, but you can see some of the specific criteria that we look at that makes up those 25 points here. Again, each planning application shall be submitted under either the housing, public facilities, or economic development subcategory, but these grants are for planning activities that are attached to hopefully a bigger project that will move forward and come back in for actual implementation dollars under housing, public facilities, or economic development. So the planning grant applications, again, can be accepted anytime throughout the year. We don't have rounds any longer for those grants. And then lastly, we just talk about the emergency grants. Again, projects who are applying for emergency funds must be able to demonstrate that an emergency has occurred within the past 18 months to warrant it being coming in under the emergency category, but the projects must meet all the minimum thresholds of whatever project of whatever category that the project fits under. So again, that's housing, public facilities, or economic development. Projects that meet those requirements will be reviewed and scored based upon the scoring criteria outlined in that applicable category above. So if it's an emergency grant for a housing project, then we would be looking at the housing criteria, the housing scoring criteria to score that emergency grant. If it's an emergency grant for a public facilities project, then of course we'd be looking at the public facilities scoring criteria that I just outlined for that project. All right, and so we just want to reiterate some of the important timelines that are coming up. Again, we have a round of the housing and public facilities program that will be opening up. Applications will be available on our website, and the funding opportunity will be posted on our website by this Friday, December 1st. And then applications will be due by Monday, January 29th 2024, and they must be received and submitted in our grant management system by 4 p.m. Then what will happen is that once those applications are received at the very end of January, then we'll move into February and March. We'll be reviewing and scoring those applications. And then in April of 2024 at the Community Development Advisory Committee or CDAC meeting, staff will make recommendations for funding at that meeting. And all applicants that apply for funding in the round will be invited and notified of that meeting prior to that meeting occurring in April of 2024. Again, to apply for CDBG grants, you must apply through our grants management system or GMS. We have links to GMS on our website. You can see a screenshot here. You must register to access the grant management system. And we have a lot of great information about tips and how to do that you can find right on the website. We do recommend for CDBG that it's streamlined. The application process is streamlined through your grant writer. So if there's a municipality, a nonprofit organization, and a grant writer all working together on a CDBG application, we ask that the grant writer take the lead and be the one that's registered and working on the application in the grant management system, with the others that are involved in the project, of course, working on the application and submitting information. But it's much more streamlined and efficient if one person is responsible in the grant management system for putting that information together and submitting the application. Again, this information, the updated funding opportunity and application for this round is not live on our website yet, but will be by this Friday. So in 48 hours by this Friday, the 1st. And so you can go on the grant management system at that point and begin working on your application at that point. We do encourage anybody that has any questions. We'll certainly take questions now, but if you have any questions about the program or about your project and its potential eligibility, please reach out to me or any member of our team. Also, Melissa has dropped the link to the request the information button that we have on our website. And that's a really great way and the preferred way to reach out if you're all set and ready to have a meeting and talk about it with multiple individuals. Requesting a meeting that way enables us to have a little bit of information beforehand about the project. So we're best prepared to meet with you to talk about the project and about the program.
Thanks, Molly and Chris, for lots of really great information. I'm not seeing any questions currently either in the chat or in the Q&A box. We can pause for a moment, just understanding that that was a lot of information for you to download. So we can wait around to see if any others pop up. As Molly mentioned, we've been sharing links throughout the presentation. We'll be following up via email with links to those relevant materials, as well as the webinar recording and the slides, and a link to that application and program guide in the coming days. So please stay tuned for that, and don't hesitate to share that with anyone in your organization that might benefit from listening or reviewing those materials.
And quickly, I did just want to flag on the energy policy. An energy charrette or audit is not required at the time of application. If you have one, that's great. If you don't, you can still apply without one in place, but you do have to include a plan on how you're going to complete that requirement after application and before award. So that's just something to consider as well.
Awesome. Seeing no additional questions at this time, I think we're going to be closing out the webinar. But as Molly mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions. And if you're ready for a pre-application meeting, using that schedule a meeting link is a great opportunity to give us some insight into the potential project you're looking to pursue with CDBG funds. So we would encourage you to use that as well. And hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all.